Political leaders and climate diplomats are meeting in Madrid for 2 weeks of talks on climate change, with warnings over the fast-rising perils of a global environmental challenge. The Conference of the Parties, or COP25 meeting, aims to step up ambition so that all countries increase their national commitments to cut emissions. The meeting follows on the heels of 3 UN reports which stress the increased urgency of limiting dangerous climate change. According to UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, the point of no return is no longer over the horizon.
We need a rapid and deep change in the way we do business, how we generate power, how we build cities, how we move, and how we feed the world. If we don't urgently change our way of life, we jeopardize life itself. Without the full engagement of the big emitters, all our efforts will be undermined. A green economy is not one to be feared, but an opportunity to be embraced, and one that can advance our efforts to achieve all the Sustainable Development Goals.
I'm now being joined by climate change expert and environmentalist Dr. John Osonwa to take a look at the importance of COP25. Dr. Osonwa, thanks for joining us on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So around 25,000 people from 200 countries are in Madrid to attend the COP25 climate conference. They include dozens of heads of state and government, business leaders, scientists, and of course, activists. The United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says the summit marks the point of no return in humanity's fight against climate change. It sounds a bit alarming, doesn't it? Is COP25 really the point of no return?
It's a critical point in human history, and the reason is this. When we had COP20 in Paris, which gave rise to the Paris Agreement, there were a number of goals that the world decided to pursue. 3 goals. One is to see that countries can reduce their carbon emissions by 45% by 2030. Second goal is to see if we can get countries to achieve carbon neutrality, which is 0 carbon emission by 2050. Then the final one is to limit global warming to about 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. So if you look at what is happening now, it's been 5 years, almost 5 years, and we haven't made much progress with regard to those cardinal goals that we set out to achieve back in Paris. Now, at the same time, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has come up with a scientific report which looks at the impact of climate change, and they have concluded that we are going to face a massive ecological and humanitarian crisis unless we take drastic steps now.
It seems that it's a critical time now, but it seems the major problem with this agreement is commitment from leaders. I mean, the US president recently pulled out of the Paris Agreement. Do you think this time we can get commitment from world leaders, especially how so many young people are coming out to tell their leaders to take more action?
Yes, I think there is increased action. If you look at what happened with the climate summit in New York back in September of this year, a number of countries came together. We had the Climate Ambition Alliance, where about 59 countries came out and said, look, in 2020, we are going to submit very ambitious action plans to reduce our emissions. At the same summit, you had Germany pledge about 60 billion in new funding for climate action within their budget, within their country. Countries like Qatar pledged more money to the climate fund, 100 million. You had another group came together, what we call the Carbon Neutrality Coalition. This group, made up of about 70 countries, are saying by 2050, we want to achieve net zero emissions. So we are seeing coordinated action to do something beyond the ordinary space of doing business. So, and that is very encouraging. Even the shipping line and ports authority came out with a grand plan to have zero emission from fuels, from marine fuels and shipping fuels that will be used in the shipping industry by 2050. So these are steps in the right direction.
Yeah, but from unprecedented fires in Brazil, the Arctic and Australia, to terrifying cyclones that laid waste to Mozambique and the Bahamas, to the flooding of Venice, the impacts of climate change are growing and becoming real day by day. Are we really doing enough to curb climate change? Are we really aware of the danger and the nearing impacts of climate change?
I think awareness is growing every day now. I don't think we're doing as much as we should. If you look at the trajectory, global carbon emission continues to rise. We are setting records in terms of the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We reached a new record last year. We're beyond 400 parts per million. You look at global carbon emissions, greenhouse gas, we are still exceeding 30 billion tons of carbon emissions every year. So we need to do more, which is why I'm glad even some of the developing countries are beginning to announce ambitious steps. Even Nigeria is part of a small group that has announced they're going to plant about 11 billion trees in the next few years. So these are steps in the right direction. But clearly we need to do more because we are losing the battle. As I said, those 3 goals that we set out to achieve back when we had the Paris Agreement, we are failing in all 3 at this juncture.
Dr. Osonwa, let's bring it home. What about for us in Nigeria? Though it is believed countries such as ours are the most affected by climate change, do you think our government is doing enough or even paying attention to climate change?
I believe they are paying attention, yes. Even the president, when he was at the United Nations General Assembly, he made some pronouncements as to what Nigeria would do, one of which is to plant, I think, about 250 million trees in the next few years. So I think they are paying attention. But with regard to the issue, are we doing enough? I would once again repeat what I said. I don't think any country at this juncture is doing enough to stem the tide, the kind of catastrophic impact that awaits us in the next few years. So Nigeria is inclusive. We need to do more about planting trees, even beyond what the president has announced. We need to do more about reducing our carbon emissions in the gas flaring sector, oil and gas sector. We need to look at our vehicle pollution profile. It is very high. We need to look at our generator usage, 60 million generators being used every day in Nigeria. That's incredibly high, polluting the environment. We need to look at even the bulbs that we use in Nigeria. Those bulbs are no longer the preferred method of providing lighting because they are very polluting to the environment. So those are some of the things we need to do in Nigeria. We're not doing enough, but I think the awareness is growing each day.
Just before I let you go, as the COP25 group rounds up the meeting this week, what expectations do you have for the end of this meeting? What expectations do you have?
You know, one of the goals of this COP is to make sure that countries are reminded that they need to update their national action plans that they have submitted. And as I said, as part of the Climate Ambition Alliance, some of them have said that when they submit those plans in 2020, they are going to be very aggressive in reducing carbon emissions. So that's one of the things we hope to see. The other issue is carbon financing. That has always been a problem, a perennial problem, which hasn't been solved. Article 6 of the Paris Agreement dealt with the issue of carbon funding. It hasn't been finalized. We don't have clear rules. We don't have clear mechanisms to access funding. So I believe they are going to look at that issue at this convention and begin to draw a roadmap to funding, to better funding.
All right, then, climate change expert and environmentalist, Dr. John Osonwa, thank you so much for speaking to us on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.